How we're going to get into the basics of contracting. It's important to note before we get into this that when you're in a program management function, contracting is a very broad term. Technically, anything that you purchase, I mean everything from a government credit card purchase, all the way to a major procurement, they're all going to involve contracting, the essentials of contracting. Some may be absolutely trivial, others are going to be extremely complicated and have lots of decision points for you. But just understand that procurement is procurement. It's the government procuring a good or service from the private sector. So you're not shipping money to the Naval Research Lab to do work. That's not a procurement, because that's government money going to government to do governmental work. But the minute somebody goes and buys a computer with it, that's a contract. The minute somebody sends a $200K to a university to do a research project, that's a contract. And as soon as they send $100K to a little business to do some work for them, that's a contract. So there's a lot of things you might not have considered where contracts actually were. So let's just get into this a little bit and talk about, again, very high level. I'm stealing a lot of this material from the management course, so those of you who have had it, this is going to be mainly review, if anything, for you. So let's just go through the basics so you understand what the words mean and why some of this stuff is important. So if you run into it later, you'll know what to do. So procurement's one of 6 basic business functions in the government. So there's creation, so that's the idea or the design. So we already talked about that. That's part of the acquisition cycle, determining what it is we're going to do. Finance, personnel, procurement, conversion, and distribution are the main business functions of government. So the process begins with a definition of procurement. So the process that's required to acquire goods and services from outside the performing organization. So you take that really loose. You're talking about even when you do send funds to another organization, that's a contract. That's getting very specific about government to government procurement. And we're really not going to get into that here. We're going to be talking mainly about the seam between government and the private sector. And the objectives are to obtain those goods and services in accordance with technical, quality, schedule, cost, and other performance objectives. And remember, you always must remember in procurement, you are dealing with tax dollars. It's not your money, it's the government's money. And therefore, there's a lot of law that falls under this about making sure that it's fair to anybody who could possibly compete for the right to supply that good or service for the government. So that's just something to keep in mind as you move ahead. So what you're looking for is you want the right quality. So you got to specify, what does good quality mean? You want to get the right quantity. Remember, we talked about before that you should know, the customer should know how many of these things they want. You got to know when you want it. You got to know how much you're willing to spend for it, and you want to get it from the right supplier. So you want to make sure that that's the right organization that's giving it to you. So there's contracts here between buyer and seller. And the seller can put in a contract with subcontractors. Any larger program you might run or be involved in is probably going to have that as well. And that's not really the government's business, but you should at least know that it's going on. And you should know that if you're the government, meaning you're on the buyer side, you do not have a contractual relationship with the subcontractor. That's important. So roles and responsibilities, program manager, which is what you might be doing, is you have overall responsibility for meeting the program objectives. But please understand, if you're the program manager, you are likely not the contracting officer. And you'll see later on in this briefing, contracting officers have very special responsibilities that only they can do. And don't step over that boundary or you could get yourself into a lot of trouble. We're talking about dealing with money now. There's a lot of things that I highlighted there, legally binding. You do not want to step over the boundary when you're talking about money. And then we have things called IPTs. These are small groups of people that focus on the engineering, material management, the independent product teams. Sorry, I should have said what IPT means. That deal with engineering, material management, logistics. You can cut these up any way you want, but because we've got a lot of different folks involved, IPTs are pretty common in larger programs. Now, a simple flow diagram of what the process looks like. So first of all, you're going to plan it. How are you going to do this? Are we going to buy something? Are we going to pay somebody to develop it? Are we going to pay something to adapt an existing product? This is the planning process, figuring out who does this. I want to make sure that I get, even if we're going to have a competition, I want to make sure that the right companies that can supply it know about it so that they will compete. So you want to make sure you have your solicitation planning. You got to write up your request for proposals. You might do a request for information first, which is non-binding, so that gets information for you that helps you to craft your program. Then you do a solicitation. You're going to do a source selection, a competitive source selection. You're going to do contract administration, and then when it's all over, you're going to close this thing out. So when you're planning, this is the process that you're figuring out what it is you're going to do. You're going to be figuring out whether you're going to be procuring. So that's a very good question. Should we even be procuring in the first place? How am I going to do it? What type of contract am I going to use? We're going to get into that a little bit later. They're not all the same. It all has to do very often with who the risk resides with. And as you learn something about the acquisition cycle, early on in the acquisition cycle, things are very vague. There's a lot of risk involved. It's really inappropriate to be shifting that risk to a contractor. The government should be bearing that risk. But as you get further on and we know very crisply what we want, then it seems a lot more appropriate to have the contractor bear more of the risk. So then we got to know what we're going to procure. We're going to know how much we're going to procure, and we're going to know when we're going to want it. The system engineering process is going to be key. And this is not a system engineering course, but very often people in our program will take system engineering courses for this very reason, because they want to know how the system engineering process works and how it fits into the acquisition cycle. So you may need to be doing things like market research and analysis. What is a fair price for this thing that I want to procure? Very often it's not obvious. So you're going to be doing source selection plans. What's the plan in terms of how your solicitation is going to go out and how you're going to evaluate? You got to say this up front. You can't make it up on the back end. You have to be able to say up front, how am I going to evaluate proposals when they come in so that everything is fair and above board. If you've ever seen like an RFP for a research program, for example, they will put a paragraph in there that says, we're going to put together a team of people and they're going to be evaluating these proposals and here's what they're looking for. So you should understand, while I certainly don't recommend that you read the Federal Acquisition Regulations, it is a very big, thick book, but you should know it's there, and it controls everything. It has something to say about everything involving acquisition, and particularly the movement of money, and the rules by which very often are civil codes that have to do with exactly how we're supposed to conduct ourselves as the government. Very important document. At least know where it is and where you can get some advice on how something that you're doing might be affected by the FAR. So as an example, we were just mentioning what contract officers do. Here it is. In the FAR, subpart 1.6.1 specifically says that contracts may be entered into and signed on behalf of the government only by contracting officers. And you can't just say you're a contracting officer. You have to be certified as a contracting officer. Contract officers go to special schools and have special knowledge that the rest of us don't have. That's why they're contracting officers. It's extremely important, if you're going to be a program officer, that you know who your contracting officer is. They are your friend, and you're going to need them to get through this entire process because there's so many things that they have to do for you. But they'll be leaning on you too. So, for example, if you have a performer that is not meeting their obligations, or is falling behind schedule, the quality is not what it should be, your contracting officer may not have the technical expertise to be able to determine that. They're going to need you to help them to determine that. But the decision to actually terminate a contract or administer or modify something has to be done by the contracting officer, even though you may be the one as a technical point of contact who's going to be making the actual decision or making the recommendation. It's the contracting officer who actually does it. That's extremely important to know. So So in a nutshell, contracting officers are really making sure they're safeguarding the interests of the United States, making sure that they are responsible for understanding the FAR. They do read it. They understand it very thoroughly and can tell you exactly how the FAR impacts what you want to do. So you're the program officer. You go to your contracting officer and say, I want to do X. You may get a flat-out, no, we're not doing that, and here's why, and it's violating the FAR in some way. Or they'll figure out some way to do it that maybe you wouldn't have known how to do. That's why these guys are important to our process. So some other thing that contracting officers do, not only are they responsible for all this stuff, but they have to make sure that contractors receive impartial, fair, and equitable treatment. Remember, this is fair. These are all taxpayers that are owning small businesses, etc., for example, that are competing for our business in the government, and they have to be treated fairly as such. They also request and consider the advice of specialists in audit, law, engineering. It could be you or other things. So they're going to take input from lots of folks, but the decisions are actually theirs. It's very important what these folks do. And then any sort of a contract is always going to have to be signed by them. So there's just a little bit more information from the FAR on the selection, appointment, and termination of an appointment as a contracting officer. It just tells you a little bit about what they have to go through to become a contracting officer and why they have the authority that they have. Now, this is a job you might have, the contracting officer's tech rep, typically called a COTAR. So if you're the COTAR, you have to maintain an arm's length relationship with the contractor in the interest of procurement integrity as well as sound contract management. So this is like I don't have a relationship with my contractor yet, but I'm the COTAR. I need to not be going to lunch with these guys and discussing the details of what it is that we want, because that could be viewed as another contractor as unfair treatment. How come you got firsthand information and I didn't? So you have to keep your contracting officer fully informed of any technical or contractual difficulties during performance. That's very important. And you're the technical point of contact. So you're the guy who's going to be watching day to day the execution of this contract. Most of the problems that might be occurring through the execution of a contract are going to come to you as the COTAR first, but you will probably not have the authority to execute on that. You'll have to pass that back to the contracting officer. And it's important to know what you don't have the authority to do as a COTAR. Right, so be careful. Don't sign anything about a contract. Don't make promises that only a contracting officer can make. Don't make any commitments. Those are called unauthorized commitments. You can get in an awful lot of trouble for doing that. You have to make sure that your contractor is under contract when they are working, not before they are under contract. So there can't be a wink, wink, well, I'm going to do a little work for you because I know the contract is coming. They can do that at their own risk, but if I were the COTAR, I wouldn't even want to know about it. They can do what they want, but I'm not going to have an email that where I'm telling them that they can do that, because they can't. Stay away from any of that stuff. You can't impose or place any demand on a contractor to perform any task or permit any substitution not specifically provided for in the contract. So the contract, that's the law. That's what specifies what that contractor is going to do for you. You have oversight over that. You do not have the authority to modify it. If a modification is needed, you got to get your contract officer involved. So just know that there are boundaries to what it is that you can do. You have a very important role as the COTAR, but you're advising, and the contracting officer is probably going to listen to you most of the time, but always lean on them to get things accomplished. So now we get into the procurement methods. Obviously, the preferred way to do everything in government is competitive, because it protects our interests. We want full and open competition wherever we possibly can. You'll have sealed bidding, where a request will go out, proposals will come in, and nobody's allowed to know anything. And then a review board looks at the proposals, and given particular criterion, will select a winner. There are competitive negotiations for best value. right? There's lots of different ways of doing this, and in the end, there are laws behind it, and it's always meant to preserve the best interests of the United States. But there's also non-competitive methods. So, and you'll see this used. This actually gets abused a lot, where somebody will say, for convenience, because I really want to get this thing done fast, and I don't want to go through that painful competitive method, I'm going to just use a non-competitive method and sole source this work to this contractor that I know can do the work. That may sound like an expeditious way to get your work done, but unless that company is the only one who can do the work, where a sole source is totally justified, you really should go through a competitive method. So if you've got some little company that produces a device and they are the only ones in the world that produce that device, you have every right to go through a non-competitive method and write your sole source justification. This is the only company that can supply this for me. And this all has to go through appropriate approvals, but you'll find non-competitive methods being used for expedience rather than because it's really not competitive. So I'm not going to go into the details of just comparing the different types of procurement, but you've got the flowcharts now for sealed bidding, competitive proposals, and sole source negotiations. They're different. There's different parts involved. There's different parts for government, different parts for private industry. In some cases, you're going to want to put boards together to look at the different proposals so that you can fairly document everything. Most of us in our line of work have participated in some element of this on the government side. Very often, where you're asked to review a pile of proposals and rank them or assign points to them or what have you, and you're one of the people that are making those decisions, and somebody, program officer who I would be working for, would in the end make the decision, but I would have input on that. So now we're going to get into the different contract types, and this is important. They're not all the same, and you want to pick a contract type, again, that fits what you're trying to accomplish, not just what's convenient. So you want to place as much responsibility on the contractor as is reasonable. That's important, as is reasonable. Reasonable allocation of risk between the buyer and the contractor is the goal here. You also want to give them a lot of incentives. You'll see a lot of the contract types, which we don't deal with too much in our line of work, will have to do with giving them incentives to get things done early or to do extra things or what have you, and these are all legally binding ways of doing business. So some things you might want to consider when you're figuring out your contract type. And remember, you can be figuring out your contract type after you've selected the contractor. This is an independent decision, so this doesn't have to do with making the decision that I'm going to do business with Acme widgets. So I might make my decision on what type of contract based on the ability of their accounting system. For some of the accounting that you're going to have, certain contract types, if the company's not capable of accounting, let's say hourly by project, etc., a certain type of contract is going to put such a burden on them to execute. They just don't have the infrastructure to do it. Don't put them in that situation. You might want to be thinking about the uncertainty of the cost estimate. So if you think that, hey, this is just a swag, we have no idea what this thing is really going to cost, that will impact your contract type. The complexity of the requirements, the urgency of the requirements. So there's all these variables that come into play when you're thinking about what type of a contract you want to put in place. So you should know that the type of contract that the government likes is fixed price contracts. The reason they like them is that they're extremely predictable. There's an argument for why we shouldn't even say that the government prefers these, because they might force you to do a fixed price contract when, like we just talked about, the cost estimate is such a swag you don't know what it's really going to cost. So now you put a fixed price contract on a project that you could be tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars off in your estimate. That's not going to go well. You're going to have a lot of contracting work to do to fix this, to get it through. When you do a fixed price contract, the risk lies mainly with the contractor. They're saying, I can deliver 10 of these widgets to you for $100,000. If it costs them $150,000, they eat the $50,000 because they said that they can do it for $100,000. So they're putting the risk with them. These contracts tend to go on the, if you remember, the right side of the acquisition cycle, where we really do know what things cost. We can reasonably estimate them. Risk of performance is low. the contractor is obligated to deliver no matter what it really costs. And they're really motivated to come in under that cost because they get to keep the difference. If they say it's going to cost me $100,000 to give you 10 widgets, and the government agrees to this, and it really only costs them 50, they get to keep the other 50. We don't keep that. So that's that we've all agreed on. And if they figure out a way to do it cheaply, they can do it as long as they meet our requirement specifications. They can't be cheap and cut corners. We get to say what the requirement is, but they get to keep the difference, in the same reason that they have to eat the difference if it goes over. And on the other end would be a cost reimbursable contract where the risk lies mainly with the government. This is when the risk is very high, and you can understand why the government doesn't like these, because we're obligated to pay. Government is obligated to pay whatever it costs. So if you overrun your budget, the government's going to have to pay it. So we're obligated to reimburse the contractor for all allowable, reasonable, and allocable costs incurred within the contract terms. So we'll see contractor agrees to provide best effort, quote unquote, which is sometimes can be very hard to estimate. Are they really giving us their very best effort? We like to stay away from these where we can. We like to have concrete deliverables and cut things up into definite parts. So I'm just not paying for the labor of my contractor in hopes that I'm going to get something out of it. It's a dangerous way to do business, and so you want to try to avoid these, but at least understand that they're there, they're legal. The government doesn't like them, though. So some other types of contracts would be like time and materials, labor hours. These are good for like service type contracts where it's not really a deliverable. I'm going to provide a service like maintenance or something. I'm just going to pay for the hours that you bill. In this case, I have to know exactly what hours your people actually worked. There's letter contracts. This type of contract is only used in circumstances of really unusual and compelling urgency, so it's really not something we're going to need to deal with. There's indefinite delivery contracts. There's something you'll hear called an IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, sort of an open-ended contract that has some boundaries around. You can't just throw anything in it, but it allows me to quickly throw tasks within a certain bucket of funds. So I have to put a cap on it. So I'm going to say this is a $10 million contract, but I don't know how many things I'm going to do, and I don't know exactly what those things are. But within some boundaries, like we're going to be developing training systems for the aviation community, and we're going to put some boundaries around this thing. So I can't be building tank simulators on this contract. That's not what we're doing here. I can't be doing maintenance. I got to be doing the development of new simulators with this thing. And I can drop new tasks on this very quickly, and it allows me to not go through the full contracting cycle. I've already competed that there's even some cases where you can have multiple contractors that can do the work. So this is this is becoming very attractive as a way to get things done quickly and expeditiously without having to go through the entire acquisition cycle. So a quick graphic just to look at. We just talked about all these different types of contracts. There's some we didn't talk about, like cost plus fixed fee, cost plus incentive fee. We did talk about firm fixed price or fixed price incentive. So these are all acronyms you're seeing on this particular slide. But the main thing is to look at the continuum of a requirement that's either very broad or very well defined, the buyer's risk, high or low, and the seller's risk, high or low. Right? We're the buyer, high or low, and the seller is the contractor. So this is a good graphic for you to look at. Okay, where do I sit on this thing? Where am I in the procurement cycle? Do I know very crisply what it is I want to buy? If I'm going to buy 100 flat screen TVs, I pretty much know what that's going to cost. Okay, the seller's risk is extremely low. The buyer's, the buyer's risk should be extremely low. I know exactly what that's going to cost. I should be able to go firm fixed price, lowest bidder, whoever tells me they can supply me with those flat screen TVs is who I'm going to buy them from. But you go to the other extreme where I'm doing 6-2 research. It's very broad. I don't know where we're going to end up. Now the risk is with me. I'm the government. The risk is with me. I should keep the risk with my contractor very low. So a few words on your solicitation planning. Now that you know what you're going to do, you got to have your mission need, your operational performance. You got to set all the stuff up front. Remember, you have to tell a proposal writer what he's writing against. You can't just leave that open. So technical performance, you're interested in past performance, cost, supportability, producibility, the management. I might ask a company to tell me how they're going to manage. How are you going to be organized to execute on this? You have a right to ask all those things. You need to make sure, in the same way that a venture capitalist, before they're going to invest in a company, is going to look at who the CEO is and do they have the right engineering team. Do I really think they can do this? Well, we're government, so we're not doing venture capital, but we still have the right to know whether the words that a company puts on paper actually match their ability to do what the words say. And no doubt you've already maybe even done some work on it with writing statements of work. Just government to government, we write statements of work. But this is used to establish a clear, understandable terms, what the contractor is going to do, what if anything's going to be provided to them. It's all got to be put in writing. We got to know what facilities are going to be involved. You got to put all this stuff in writing, and it provides a standard for contractor performance. So while the statement of work isn't the contract itself, it's a very key part of it. We also do things called requests for proposals. So this is where it's a technical description of a system or service. I'm just putting out for industry to respond what it is I think I need. And folks are going to be supplying me back with statements of work, statements of objectives, and this is what they think they're going to do for me so that I can make some type of a selection. So the process is actually, officially, an invitation for contractors to bid or propose a contract. That's what it is. And we are required to, when we're going to compete these things, you have an exclusion from this when you get a sole source, but otherwise you are obligated to publicly advertise. Used to be something called Fed BizOps. There's other mechanisms now in place where the government websites where you post these things. And if you're a small business owner who does business with the government, or even a large business owner, you are on a daily basis scanning those advertisements for RFPs that fit the profile of your company, because you might want to respond to it. That's why we're required to advertise them there. The advertisement must appear in advance of the solicitation. Got to give people time. So we solicit potential contractors two different ways. There's an invitation for bid, right? So this is where it's a price-based selection. So you're saying, I can do what you're saying you want for this much money. But normally what we're going to run into in our line of work is a request for proposal. It's not I'm just buying something. I'm not buying 10 TVs. I'm buying I'm buying your engineering expertise to solve a problem, right? So and there's some vagueness in that. So that's usually an RFP. If you remember the big red arrows chart we just showed you, we're moving towards the left now. We're moving to the right is where I know exactly what I want to buy. I'm buying pencils. I'm buying TVs. I'm buying computers. As I move to the left, I'm buying more vague stuff. That's going to be an RFP. So just so you know what's going on in terms of contract administration, you got to manage changes. Changes happen. Very often, what we said we wanted up front changes through the process, and you got to be able to modify it. Remember, you as the COTAR or any other engineering role inside of this, it is not your job to do that. You need the contracting officer to do it, but they're going to need you to help define exactly what that change actually is and is it reasonable. You're also going to be monitoring their performance. You're going to be checking their quality. You're going to be setting up milestones so that they have wickets they have to go through. You don't just want to drop all your money on the street and compete it and then have the contractor go away and they come back a year or 2 years later and either they succeeded or they didn't. You might have wickets they have to go through, where at some particular point they have to demonstrate for you that they're making adequate progress so that you can make a determine whether or not you're going to continue. You might have disputes. They may say, hey, government, you said you were going to give me this and then you didn't give it to me. Or you may have a dispute with them of, hey, you didn't meet a particular objective. We can have terminations, and we certainly are going to have closeouts at the end. So this is just talking about some of the things that might happen after the award is made. So now we've thought about everything, we figured out how we're going to do it, we advertised, we got a bunch of solicitations, we got a bunch of proposals in, we put our solicitation out, we got a bunch of proposals in, we made our selection, now we're working with Acme Widgets, but we got to change something. So we do something called a change order. It's authorized by the contract, there's change clauses, it's a very unique thing that we're able to do because we're the government, but we have to be fair to the contractor. So while they have to continue to do what they were doing before, if they said that they were going to do something for $100,000 and now we come in and we say we want to change, we have to negotiate the cost of that change. They have the right to say, hey, if you're not going to put any more money into this, maybe we need to take something that we said we were going to do off because you're going to put something on. And this is a negotiation, and it all has to be worked out, but it gives us a level of fungibility in the contracting process with the understanding that we're the government and we often are pretty vague when we put a contract out, and we do need to be able to change things. So a few more things on changes. So supplemental agreements, so you make some sort of an adjustment. You can make a constructive change. There might be some guidance for actions. There might be a contractor effort that's not really a part of the contract that you actually want to be able to change in the contract. You still have to go through a change order for these sorts of things, but just know that there are a variety of different change constructs that are available to you. You don't do any of them, the contracting officer does them, but you may be the first line of defense when the contractor says, hey, I got a problem, and then you got to go to your contracting officer and find out what the best thing is to do. A couple different ways of terminating a contract. The first is termination for convenience. This is also unique to the government, right? If you have a contract with a general contractor for doing something at your home, you don't have the right to a termination for convenience, but the government does. So we got to put it in writing. We don't necessarily have to justify it. Remember, in our case, you could have a situation where you've got a program of record and you're doing your thing, and you had a budget of $500,000 to work on this thing, and because we're the government, you go into a continuing resolution or something like that, all of a sudden your money's gone. You don't have any money. We have to be able to terminate for convenience. We have to have the ability to do that so that we can get out of a contract without, we don't want to hurt our contractors, but they're entitled to termination costs. If they've sunk a lot of money into something with the anticipation that there is follow-on money coming, we have to allow them, whatever the costs are, for them to extract themselves from that arrangement. They're allowed to do that. Because remember, this is not an unauthorized obligation. They were working in good faith that the whole amount of money that we agreed on was coming. And now you're telling me it's not coming. So now I have the right to unwind myself from that, so at least I don't lose money, potentially put my company out of business, simply because Congress made a change in budgets and your money went away. The other thing to know about is a termination for default. So you can default when they're late, they're not coming up with their deliveries on time, they didn't perform something that they said that they were going to perform, they're not making satisfactory progress, that's endangering the performance of the overall program. So we still have to pay for what was completed. You don't get to not pay them at all just because they fell behind. You got to pay for what was done. You can terminate the contract and not pay anymore. So in this case, if the government has put funds beyond what they received, you can obtain reprocurement costs. So you can actually get some funds back if in fact they were actually maybe not acting in good faith or something like that, where they fell behind. So an organization you should really know something about is DCMA. Every contractor you're ever going to deal with is going to know about them. Very important organization. They're sort of the eyes and ears of the program manager. There's just so many things that are involved, especially in a major contract, that the program management office can't possibly be expected to know everything. And this organization is in place to kind of help you with a lot of the different pieces, which we're going to look at in just a second. And so what they're interested in is they can help you in all phases of your contracting process. So remember, we talked about pre-award, assessing contractor capabilities. So you're doing a major award and you've got a bunch of proposals. How do you know that these companies are really capable of doing what the paper says they can do? Well, DCMA can help you do that. They can look at past performance. They can look at other contracts that these companies have done. There's all kinds of things that DCMA can do. It can also help you during the award and the performance of the award, and they can help you with the closeout at the end. So DCMA is extremely important. As important is a place called the Defense Contract Audit Agency. So again, another organization that your contractors are going to know really well. So this is a principal advisor to the contracting officer on financial matters. So they're going to be performing audits, doing cost estimation, all sorts of things involving money with contractors. These guys do all of this sorts of stuff. They review financial and accounting aspects of contractors' cost control systems. So remember we talked about, does a contractor even have the ability to be auditable at a certain level? DCAA is the organization that will tell you that. So things like tracking independent hours, being able to track the number of hours that engineer X spent on project Y may be very important to DCAA. And if a company can't track to that level, they're gonna be problems with certain sorts of contracts. The Defense Finance and Accounting Service entitles and disperses payments. This is where the money is actually coming from. So contractors don't get paid by you, of course. They don't get paid by the contract office, of course. They get paid by DFAS. So this is where their money is coming from. They manage invoices and vouchers for contractors. Just know that they're there. You probably won't deal with them, but they are the organization. You should know that they're the organization that actually handles the physical money and the sending of money to your contractor. So a quick summary of what we just talked about is procurement is the process about anything, any good or services. We're not just buying stuff. With an often we're buying services. So I mean, this could be, you could have a contract for custodial services on your base. That's a contract. They're not providing you a good, they're providing a service. And there's lots of other things that we do that are services. And so just know that, but it's all procurement. The type of contract that you might put in place is different. You want to make sure that the system engineering process is integrated with the procurement process. That's why at NPS anyway, we've got a system engineering department and we've got a business school. And both of them are, they're like opposite sides of the same coin when we talk about acquisition. They're both equally important. And so the procurement process may occur multiple times throughout the acquisition program life cycle. So we learned about JSIDs, we looked at the whole acquisition process. There's not going to be one contract in that for a major acquisition. There could be hundreds of contracts inside of that. So you just need to know that all of those things have to fit into the bigger picture. Also know that the program manager, which might be you, could also be the COTAR, and the contracting officer share responsibility for the procurement process. And please keep track of what the boundaries are of your responsibilities versus the contracting office or the contracting officer. Nothing gets us in more trouble than when a program manager or a COTAR overstep their bounds in terms of contracting. That contracting officer is there to protect you. Let them do their job. We also talked about procurement planning, all the different pieces that come up on the front end, picking what type of contract you're going to do and why you're going to do it, your solicitation planning, documenting your product requirements, making sure you got statements of work, performance specifications, you know how you're going to measure everything up front, and then actually doing the solicitation, the different types of things that might be in place, and why you might choose one over the other. So that's our basics of contracting. I know that's kind of a long module, but there's a lot there, and please understand that if you take the management course or take a defense acquisition, a DAU course in it, it'll be an entire course or more on all of this stuff. There's a lot to it. My main goal right here was just to make you aware of all the different pieces, because you may actually be a COTAR without taking a course in all this stuff. You might actually get into program management without taking courses on all this stuff. And you at least need to know the nuts and bolts of how the different pieces fit together.